deep in the heart of Arkansas, where the Ozark Mountains fold into endless hollows and the forest grows so thick that daylight barely touches the ground, campers have been vanishing for decades. The locals call it the Hollow Walker, some whisper of the starving man. But one former ranger claims he saw something far worse. It started with abandoned campsites and ended with a face pressed against glass. This first-hand account uncovers one of the Ozark's darkest wilderness mysteries. Welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and become part of our ever-growing community of the curious. I've gone back and forth for a long time about whether to share what I saw. I was with the Forest Service for over 12 years, most of them in northern Arkansas, and later I worked search and rescue coordination for missing persons in the Ozark National Forest. A lot of what I did involved campers and hunters who never came back. You learn to accept that sometimes the wilderness just takes people. But what started happening in the early 2000s around the Buffalo National River and Richland Creek Wilderness didn't fit anything I'd seen before. I still live in Jasper. From my back porch, you can look east and see the dark ridge lines that rise above the Buffalo River Valley. That's where most of this took place. Miles of limestone bluffs, overgrown trails, and hollows so deep you lose sunlight by mid-afternoon. It's legal to camp and hunt there during open seasons. White-tailed deer, black bear, wild turkey. The locals say it's the last truly wild country left in Arkansas. And after dark, you feel that in your bones. When I started ranger work, the talk around the stations was about lost hikers, illegal campers, and the usual black bear encounters. But by 2002, we were already getting a strange pattern of disappearances. Experienced campers who knew the trails and creek crossings like their own neighborhoods. They'd park at Steel Creek, Richland Creek, or the Hurricane Creek trailheads and never check back in. We'd find the vehicles later, doors locked, permits still fresh on the dashboard, tents and packs gone. Some years it was one case. Some years 3 or 4. I remember a search in 2005 that still bothers me. A couple from Little Rock went missing near the Spy Rock area. We found their campsite half packed up, sleeping bags folded, cook stove still warm. The woman's jacket and both their phones were sitting by the fire ring, but no tracks led away. I told the Newton County Sheriff's Office it looked like they'd been pulled from camp, not walked out. They told me, "That's not something you write in a report." Over time, we started seeing things that didn't make sense. Tents unzipped from the inside but torn downward, like someone had clawed through the fabric. We'd find coolers flipped open, food untouched, water bottles scattered. One time near Kyle's Landing, we found a tent with the poles bent inward, canvas shredded, and drag marks in the dirt leading into the brush. The marks went about 20 yards and vanished into thick undergrowth. No blood, no gear, nothing. By 2006, missing camper reports were coming in almost every season. We'd go in with search dogs, helicopters when the weather allowed, volunteers from surrounding counties. Nothing. Sometimes we'd find something days later, a backpack torn open at the bottom of a ravine, bits of clothing caught on branches. Once we found a boot with the laces still tied near the hemmed-in hollow trail. Inside was a sock, nothing else. The medical examiner said it could have been pulled off by fast-moving water. But that trail was 2 miles from any creek deep enough to do that. There's a spot off Highway 43 just past the turnoff to Irby Road where I swear the temperature drops. Step out of the truck and the air feels 15 degrees colder. A hunter from Russellville named Kevin Pace disappeared there in 2007. We found his rifle leaning against a tree, scope still attached. Beside it was a scuff mark in the leaves and a smear of something dark on the bark. No blood trail on the other side, No boot prints, nothing. The case report listed it as lost in terrain. Around that time, I began noticing the same detail in multiple incidents. Campsites looked lived in, fires recently used, but the people were just gone. Not packed up and moved. Gone. Sleeping bags half out of tents, boots sitting by campfire rings, flashlights still on. One site near Tyler Bend had 3 tents set up, food half cooked, all the gear intact. The family of 5 was never found. By 2008, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I started keeping notes. Every time a camper went missing, I'd photograph the site before search teams arrived. I documented tent conditions, gear placement, anything that seemed off. I kept the files in my truck, never logged them with the office. Something told me they wouldn't want to see what I was seeing. Over time, the stories started picking up their own folklore. The loggers working the back roads near Ponca called it the Hollow Walker, a tall shadow that moved between the bluffs after dark. Old-timers from Boxley talked about the starving man of the Ozarks, saying he came down from the high ridges after bad winters, feeding on what the cold left behind. Some of the older families around Jasper had stories going back generations, warnings about certain hollows you didn't camp in, certain creeks you didn't follow after sunset. I started collecting everything I could find. I'd photograph campsites before anyone else arrived, measure distances, document conditions. I found tents with claw marks raked down from the top, fabric torn in strips like something had dragged claws through it. I found coolers opened but untouched, food still sealed inside, as if whatever opened them wasn't interested. Near the Cecil Cove area, I found a deer carcass stripped of organs but left otherwise intact. The heart, liver, and lungs were gone, ribs cracked open clean, but scavengers hadn't touched it. The meat was still there, rotting in the sun. Then I found the tracks. It was late spring of 2009, near a muddy section of trail below Hawksbill Crag. Barefoot prints, 16 inches long, narrow at the heel with 5 toes splayed wide apart like they'd been stretched. The stride between them was close to 6 feet. I measured 3 clear impressions before the trail turned to rock. I took photos, made plaster casts, stored them in my garage. I didn't tell the office about that one. The tracks didn't match anything I knew. I'd been tracking black bear, cougar, coyote, and feral hogs for over a decade. Bears leave claw marks ahead of the pad. These had no claws, just deep toe impressions. The weight distribution was wrong too, heavier on the ball of the foot like something walking upright. I found human remains twice. The first time was in 2010, near a ravine below the Big Bluff Trail. A hiker's femur, cracked lengthwise, marrow cavity scraped clean. The second time was in 2012, off an old logging road near Snowball. Ribs scattered in the leaf litter, edges smooth like they'd been boiled. I called both in. The medical examiner listed them as animal predation. But bears crush bones when they chew. Cougars leave tooth marks. These bones looked processed. I started noticing that almost every disappearance happened near water. Creeks, springs, the Buffalo River itself. Places where fog settled thick in the mornings and sound didn't carry. If you camped alone in those areas and something came for you at night, no one would ever hear you scream. There was a spot near the Steel Creek campground where I found boot prints ending mid-stride, just stopped, like the person had been lifted off the ground. The surrounding dirt was disturbed in a circle, branches broken at shoulder height, but no other tracks anywhere. I stood there for 20 minutes trying to make sense of it. I couldn't. A search volunteer named Angela Reeves, a retired EMT from Harrison, told me she'd found something near Pruitt in 2011. A camper's hand, she said, still wearing a wedding ring. It had been separated at the wrist, bone snapped clean, no tearing. Like it got twisted off, she told me, staring at her coffee cup. Not bitten, not cut. Twisted. That description stuck with me. Not the violence of it, but the method, purposeful, controlled. By 2008, missing camper calls came almost every season. We'd go in with search dogs, drones when the budget allowed, helicopters for the worst terrain. Nothing. The dogs would track to a certain point, then stop, circling and whining like they'd lost the scent completely. Drone footage showed nothing but trees and rock. Helicopter sweeps turned up abandoned gear, sometimes a torn tent, but never the people. Once we found a scattered pile of clothes near the upper Buffalo Wilderness. Shirt, pants, boots, all laid out in a line like someone had undressed and walked away. The clothes weren't torn or bloody. They were just there, in the middle of nowhere, 3 miles from the nearest trail. By 2012, we were pulling partial remains more often. An arm found near Cave Mountain Road. Bones picked clean. A torso discovered by kayakers below Ponca, ribs flared open, no head or limbs attached. The reports always came back the same way. Animal predation, accidental death, remains inconclusive. There was something else too. Search teams started reporting strange conditions in the areas where people disappeared. Cold pockets where the temperature dropped suddenly, even in summer. A smell like rotting meat that came and went with no source. And silence. Complete silence. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just dead air that made your ears ring. That's when I started hearing about the whistle. A long, drawn-out sound, breathy and high-pitched, like someone exhaling through clenched teeth. Hikers would freeze, thinking another person was nearby, but no one ever appeared. The sound would drift through the trees, rise and fall, then stop. I logged 8 separate reports of that whistle between 2009 and 2014. Different people, different locations, all describing the same thing. One man said it sounded almost human, but wrong, like someone who'd forgotten how to make the sound properly. In 2013, a bow hunter from Fayetteville named Marcus Tillman disappeared near the Ponca Wilderness. We found his compound bow on the ground, arrow still nocked, drawn back and ready. Next to it were drag marks in the dirt, 2 parallel lines leading into thick brush. They went 50 yards and ended at a limestone outcrop. No blood, no prints on the far side, nothing. The sheriff's report listed it as lost in terrain. Around that time, I began hearing the same detail from multiple people. The whistling, campers near Tyler Bend, hikers on the goat trail, hunters working the ridges above Boxley. They'd hear it at dusk or just after dark, a sound that made them stop mid-step and listen. Not a bird, not the wind, but something deliberate. It would echo once, twice, then fade into silence. The older locals had their own explanations. A man in Ponca told me to throw salt in the campfire if I heard it, said it would keep the hollow walker from coming closer. Another told me to hang any kill high before sunset, never leave meat on the ground. Some of the families around Jasper wouldn't camp past the limestone bluffs, wouldn't even talk about why. A few people mentioned Wendigo, but they used it like an outsider's word, not theirs. One elder from near Marshall, a man who'd lived in the Ozarks his whole life, told me something I'll never forget. What lives out there doesn't eat because it's hungry, he said. It eats because it remembers being hungry. That line stuck with me. I started reaching out to anyone who'd been close to the disappearances. A trail guide named Sam Cortez from Mountain View told me he'd found a camper's tent in 2013 near the Fitton Cave area. The poles were snapped inward, he said, like something heavy had landed on top of it. Inside was a sleeping bag soaked in something dark that wasn't quite blood. It was thicker, almost black. I asked the rangers to test it, but they never did. A logger named Danny Marsh told me he saw something near Fallsville in 2012. He was cutting timber on private land adjacent to the national forest when he spotted movement on a ridgeline. Tall, he said, way too tall, all bones and gray skin. I thought it was a burned tree stump until it turned its head. He packed up his gear and left the site that afternoon, never went back. A woman named Rita Bowman, a search and rescue volunteer, found a boot near Low Gap in 2014. The foot was still inside. She said the leg had been separated just above the ankle, bone snapped clean through. No tearing, no saw marks, just broken. By 2016, I'd left the Forest Service, worn out and half convinced I was imagining patterns where none existed. My supervisors thought I was obsessed, reading too much into routine wilderness deaths. Other rangers avoided my questions. The official line was always the same. People get lost. Terrain is dangerous. Nature takes its course. I stopped arguing and walked away. But I couldn't stay away from it. The hollow feeling that something was out there, something deliberate, kept pulling me back. I'd drive the back roads near Buffalo Point or Ponca, windows down, listening. I'd check missing person reports online, cross-reference locations, look for patterns the authorities refused to see. When a backpacker named Travis Holman went missing near Hawksbill Crag in October of 2018, I heard about it through a friend still with the service. Travis was former Army, experienced outdoorsman, the kind of guy who could navigate by stars if his GPS died. He'd been solo camping the Whitaker Point area, planning a 3-day loop through the upper Buffalo wilderness. He'd checked in with a friend by satellite phone around 1 p.m. on his second day, said he was setting up camp near the ridgeline above the crag. Weather was clear, everything looked good. That was the last anyone heard. 3 days later, I volunteered to help with the search. The Forest Service didn't want me there, but the family pushed for extra bodies, and they couldn't say no. I drove up Highway 43 toward the Whitaker Point trailhead and hiked in with my old gear, GPS unit, and camera. The official search had already covered the main trails. I went further, following old logging roads and deer paths into areas most teams wouldn't bother with. The terrain was rough, limestone outcrops and thick stands of cedar, but manageable for someone with Travis's experience. On the 4th day, about 2 miles northwest of where Travis had made his last call, I found drag marks, long furrows in the pine needles and leaves, like something heavy had been hauled uphill. That direction didn't make sense. If an animal dragged a kill, it would go downhill to water or cover. These marks went straight up the ridge toward exposed rock and thin timber. I followed them for 40 yards until they disappeared into a thicket of blackberry and greenbrier, so dense I had to crawl. When I pushed through to the other side, I found torn fabric, blue nylon, the same color as the tent Travis's friend said he'd been carrying. That was all. No tent, no body, just a strip of fabric caught on thorns. That night, back at base camp, another searcher told me they'd found Travis's backpack half a mile south, torn open near Frog Bayou. Inside were his field permits, a water filter, and what looked like dried meat. The lab tested it later. The report said the DNA didn't match any known game species in Arkansas. They never clarified what it did match. The search was called off after 10 days. Travis Holman was declared lost in the wilderness, presumed dead. His family held a memorial service in Mountain Home that November. I didn't go. I was too angry at what I knew and couldn't prove. That winter, I kept going back. I'd hike the Buffalo River trails in January cold, when most people stayed home, searching for something concrete. I started noticing things other searchers had missed. Trees with bark stripped high above reach, fibers torn downward in long strips, ground disturbed in patterns that didn't match animal dens, and always that smell, faint but there, like spoiled meat left in summer heat. In February of 2019, I was hiking damage assessment near the upper Richland Creek area after an ice storm when I found it, a section of hillside below Big Devil's Backbone where the ground had been excavated. Not a natural washout or animal burrow, but dug out, earth piled to one side, opening large enough to crawl into. I should have called it in right then. Instead, I turned on my flashlight and looked inside. Bones, dozens of them. Deer femurs split open, marrow cavities scraped clean, elk ribs cracked at the joints, and mixed in with the animal remains, human bones. A skull missing its jaw, 2 femurs, one with boot leather still attached at the ankle, vertebrae scattered like puzzle pieces. I backed out, hands shaking, and radioed the Newton County Sheriff. 2 deputies arrived an hour later with a Forest Service supervisor. We documented the site, took photos, marked the location. The deputies called it in to the state police. By that evening, the area was cordoned off with yellow tape and closed to public access. A week later, I asked what the investigation found. They told me the site had been cleared and backfilled. No report ever surfaced. By then, even the rangers started trading stories. They'd come back from overnight patrols looking pale, hands unsteady, saying they'd heard something walking parallel to them in the dark. Every time they'd stop, it would stop. Shine a light into the trees, nothing there. Keep walking, the footsteps would start again. A ranger named Joel from the Buffalo district told me he saw eyes reflecting his headlamp beam one night near Lost Valley. They were maybe 10 feet off the ground, caught in the branches of a dead cedar. He said they didn't blink like an animal's eyes. They just stared, unmoving, until he backed away. I couldn't let it go. Every missing person report pulled me back in. Every strange detail fed the certainty that something was hunting people in those hills. I started mapping the disappearances, marking each location with a pin. The pattern was clear. Almost every case clustered around creek drainages that fed into the Buffalo River or its tributaries, places where fog settled thick in the hollows and sound got swallowed by limestone bluffs. That's the territory. The high country between Tyler Bend and Ponca, the deep hollows below Hawksbill Crag, the burned-over slopes near Big Bluff. If you camp alone in that zone after dark, you're in its range. I decided to go back in with trail cameras, motion sensors, anything that might document what was out there. I recruited 2 other former rangers who'd seen enough to believe me, and in December of 2019, we set up equipment at 3 locations along Richland Creek. Cameras mounted high in trees, facing game trails and creek crossings. We checked them every 2 weeks through January. Most of the footage showed deer, raccoons, the occasional black bear, but one camera caught something on January 18th at 2:47 a.m., a dark shape moving upright through the frame, too tall for a person. Too thin. The motion sensor triggered, but the image was blurred, just a streak of movement before it passed out of range. I went back alone to retrieve that camera on February 9th, 2020. It was a Sunday, cold and wet, the kind of winter day where fog clings to the valley floor and never burns off. I told my wife I'd be back by dark. I packed my truck with my rifle, GPS, extra batteries, and a thermos of coffee. Then drove out Highway 7 toward the Richland Creek access road. I parked near an old spur called Forest Road 1205, a washed-out logging track that climbs toward an abandoned fire lookout. The temperature was 28 degrees, ground still frozen from the night before. I started hiking in around 2 p.m., following the creek upstream. About 1.5 miles in, the woods went completely quiet. No birds. No wind moving through the trees. Nothing. The air felt heavier, colder than it should. I kept going, rifle slung over my shoulder, boots crunching through ice-crusted leaves. Then came that smell, sweet and rancid, like roadkill left in the sun for days. It hit me so hard, I stopped mid-step and covered my nose with my jacket sleeve. I pressed on. When I reached the spot where the camera was mounted, the tree was snapped, broken clean off about 5 feet above the ground, trunk split like something had wrenched it sideways. The camera was on the ground in pieces, casing shattered, lens cracked, memory card gone. That's when I heard it. The whistle, long, high, breathy. It echoed once through the fog, maybe 40 yards away, then again closer. I spun around, rifle coming up to my shoulder, finger on the safety. My breath fogged the air. I scanned the trees, looking for movement. Between 2 cedars, something was standing. It was too tall. I could see the shape through the mist, hunched at the shoulders, ribs visible under skin the color of wet ash. The arms hung too low, past where the knees should be. I couldn't see the face clearly, just the outline of a head tilted slightly forward. Then it stepped closer and I saw the eyes, dull yellow, catching the fading light, set deep in a skull that looked stretched. The skin pulled tight over bone, no fat, no muscle, just sinew and hollow cheeks. The hands came into view next. Long fingers, at least 8 inches from palm to tip, ending in nails that looked dark and cracked like old wood. They curled slightly, twitching. The mouth hung open, too wide, jaw unhinged. Teeth visible inside, broken and uneven like they'd been shattered and left to heal wrong. I raised my rifle higher, sighted down the barrel, but my arms were shaking. The thing tilted its head slowly to one side like it was curious, like it was studying me. Then it made a sound I'll never forget. A low, wet growl that vibrated in my chest, rising into something almost human. A moan that sounded like words trying to form but couldn't. I fired. The crack split the silence. The creature jerked backward but didn't fall. It just stood there, staring, one hand reaching up to touch its shoulder where the round hit. Then it lunged. Not a run, a jerking motion forward, arms swinging, too fast for something that looked so wrong. I fired again, then again. The third shot going wide as I stumbled backward. My rifle jammed. I yanked the bolt. Nothing. I turned and ran, crashing through brush, hearing it behind me, heavy steps, branches snapping, that wet breathing sound getting closer. I could hear its claws scraping bark as it moved between trees. My pack slammed against my back, boots catching on roots. I tripped once, went down hard on my shoulder, rolled, scrambled back up. The breathing was right behind me. I hit the access road and sprinted for the truck, fumbling for my keys, hands numb. I got the door open, threw myself inside, jammed the key into the ignition. The engine turned over just as something slammed into the passenger side. The whole truck rocked, metal groaned. I looked right and saw it. The face pressed against the window, skin torn around the mouth. Eyes sunken and milky, jaw hanging open wide enough to show the back of its throat, blood smeared across its chest, dark and dried. I floored it. Tires spun on gravel, the truck fishtailed, then caught. Another impact hit the bed, denting the metal. In the rearview mirror, I saw it standing in the road, arms hanging low, head cocked. Then it turned and vanished into the fog. When I reached Jasper, there were claw marks down the driver's side of the truck, deep enough to strip paint and dent the metal. 4 parallel gouges running from the door handle to the rear wheel well. The Newton County deputy met me at the ranger station. I showed him the damage, told him everything. He looked at the marks, looked at me, and said it must have been a bear. I told him I'd been a ranger for 12 years, and I knew what bears looked like. He didn't write it down. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the whistle outside my bedroom window, even when there was no wind. I'd see movement in the tree line behind my house, shadows that didn't belong. My wife asked what was wrong. I couldn't tell her. I moved to Harrison a month later. After my report went nowhere, I shared what evidence I had with 3 people I trusted. 2 former rangers and a wildlife biologist from the University of Arkansas. We went back that spring with thermal drones, motion sensors, and body cameras. We didn't find the creature, but we did find another campsite. The tent was shredded, ground stained with something dark that wasn't quite blood. Nearby were 2 deer carcasses, organs removed, bones stripped clean. The biologist said it looked like selective feeding. Only the softest tissues were taken: heart, liver, lungs, eyes. Predators don't do that. We've since formed an unofficial group, planning another expedition for next fall. We've got better equipment now, night vision, stronger cameras. We want to document whatever's in there, maybe even capture it on film. It's dangerous, but someone needs to bring proof before more people vanish. There are still missing campers this year. Their families call me because no one else will talk straight with them. I don't have answers, only patterns. The hollow walker, the starving man, the wendigo, whatever you name it, it's still out there and it's hungry. They say the Ozark hollows hold secrets, dark ones, places where the fog never lifts, where the trees grow too thick for sunlight to touch the ground. And sometimes when the cold wind crawls down from the ridges, something else moves between those limestone bluffs, something that remembers what hunger feels like.